Serious, what's the scariest/most horrifying situation you have found yourself in? There's a ride at Thorpe Park, UK, called the Colossus. It's a 10-loop roller coaster. I went around it without the harness/safety bar on my 13th birthday. 3 times we told them that the harness kept unlocking. 3 times they clicked it back in and said I was good to go. Then the ride started and I didn't get a chance to get out. On the first part going up I hear click and the harness swings up. All I had was this tiny seatbelt that buckles over your crotch. I remember just saying FCK and holding onto the metal bars on either side of me. My sister was sitting next to me and was freaking out more than I was. She had her arm across my chest whilst some random dude behind me had figured out what was going on and was holding both my arms from behind. 10 loops later, my sister is sobbing. I'm numb from fear/shock and got led to a bench and given a bar of chocolate. My mom went ballistic at the staff but can't remember what happened. I'm still not sure if the best or worst part is that my brother went to the gift shop and bought me and I survived the Colossus medal. Edit. No, it didn't stop me going on more rides. I always think, what's the chances of it happening again? Bonus edit. I was a skinny kid when we went to America and went on the Universal ride Dr. Doom, the one that shoots you up vertically at speed. I remember sitting in the seat and realizing the harness was too big for me. Stuck both my arms through it and turned to my brother saying, "Hey, I can fit right through this." I then put my arms back and went on the ride as normal, except with my brother shit scared and holding on to me. I had a blast, him not so much. It's been years but I haven't forgotten almost falling out of a roller coaster at Six Flags in Houston, Texas when I was 11. Back then there were no safety belts, just a lap bar. I met the height/weight requirements but started lifting up out of my seat after the first drop. I held on to that lap bar for my life. Some kind of crazy way this teenager behind me quickly realized what was happening. He put his right arm on my shoulder and held me firmly and placed the remainder of the ride. When we got off, his date and I just looked at each other. We were all in shock and never spoke. He saved my life. I regret not thanking him. I never told my mom, who was waiting for me. I think about it every few years. I still don't understand how he did that with one hand. In Canada we have this ride called the Zipper. Caged car that spin around on a huge arm, kind of like a chainsaw looking bar. The cars themselves also flip around and around. I was 11 and when I stood beside the height requirement board, I was just tall enough. In the ride the only thing holding you down is a lap bar, and it's not really a full seated chair, you're kind of standing with your knees bent. Ride started and the first flip my face hit the cage. The lap bar didn't even touch my legs and my mom was trying to get me to brace my legs and hands against the door of the cage. Worst few minutes of my life. Thankfully the operator noticed my cries and stopped for me. He gave me a free ride ticket to something else because I was hysterical. Turns out the height board was leaning against a fence and not standing upright. I was way too short. 17 years later and I have still never rode that stupid ride again. Something happened to me on Edna in Laurent, Montreal, Quebec. Except for me they never pushed the bar down to click in place. My ex and I were yelling at the attendants in French and English to get their attention but they started the ride anyways. I too was only held in by the crotch strap and my ex-BF trying to hold the bars down. This coaster has multiple inversions and loops all over water and concrete. When I got off I was bawling and went to security and argued with them. The lady tried to tell me that I was probably safe, the bar just didn't fasten as tight as I wanted and I screamed at her saying it never locked in the first place. She got a sudden look of shock on her face and SSIDO and refunded my ticket as well as the rest of my family's, for total at $70-ish each. I will say that I went back with my refunded tickets and I went on Edna again. Much more enjoyable when you aren't screaming and crying because you think you're going to fall out and become a pancake. I was in a single-engine aircraft. My husband was the pilot and we had 4 friends with us. We were trying to get to Uluru, but were blown off course and got lost. We flew for hours, night came and every now and then we could see small lights on the ground from isolated homes in the outback. My husband was trying to reach Alice Springs because they had a decent-sized airport but we were relying on seeing the lights from the town to know which direction to head in. But there was a huge full moon and we couldn't see any kind of glow. I was mentally saying goodbye to my 2 children. Safe at home with their grandparents. The Alice Springs air controllers sent out 2 planes in 2 directions to try to find us, and by some kind of miracle one did, and began to lead us back to the airport, but we were low on fuel, Finally the worst happened, the engine began to stutter and finally cut out. Only the moon for light. As we went down, I was wondering how painful my death was going to be. I was trying to pray but couldn't string two words together. It was so eerie, no engine noise, only the sound of the propeller turning from the plane's movement. But the good thing about small planes is that they can become gliders, and with the bright moonlight my husband was able to see the ground quite well. We hit the ground, lots of noise. The left wing dug into the ground, swinging us around and slowing the plane down. I realized there was a good chance we were going to survive. We came to a stop and all jumped out, all fine except for maybe a few bumps. The other plane was circling overhead, and our radio was working, so they were able to tell us they would send another plane and drop food, water and blankets. We spent the night on the ground, and the next morning the Northern Territory Police sent a couple of officers in a four-wheel drive to bring us to Alice Springs. It was like being reborn, after not just thinking, more like knowing we were all going to die and then getting a reprieve. We all felt we'd been given a second chance, and it was beautiful. I went off a cliff in an SUV. I was a passenger and the driver was my stepfather. We were up in the mountains on a dirt, washboard road and he was going too fast. I asked him to slow down and he said, "I don't have the same problem you and your mother do with mountain roads." Then he turned his head to look at the mountains on the other side, and he didn't see the next sharp curve. I hollered at him and he swung the wheel hard away from the drop-off. There was no guard. We fishtailed back and forth and finally the car came to a stop. I thought for a second we made it. But then a horrible creaking sound came from under the car. My stepdad said, "Aw shit, we're gonna roll," and we did. All of the windows and the sunroof broke and sand filled the car. My eyes and mouth were full of sand. I hung onto the roof strap and the door. I thought, well, this is it, and waited to die. The roof of the car crumpled in over my head and I put one hand on top of my head to soften the blows. This all happened very fast. I didn't even realize what I was doing. I think it was just instinct. The car rolled a few times down into the canyon, then hit a boulder and stopped, upright. I jumped out of the car and tried to climb back up the mountain. Some people came and pulled me up. My hand was all cut up from protecting my head, but otherwise I had just some neck pain. All that night I dreamed I was tumbling. I found out a week later that I had ruptured a disc in my neck and had to have immediate surgery. It took a year before I was diagnosed with traumatic brain injury, because I couldn't do my studies anymore. The whole thing was so traumatic that I had PTSD. I still talk to my stepdad, but I have never let anyone drive me ever again. That was 17 years ago. This morning I was driving along a motorway at 58 miles per hour in my 44-ton articulated truck when a young man jumped down from a bridge in front of me in order for me to run him over and kill him. We made eye contact while he was on his way down and he looked very frightened. I somehow managed to swerve and miss him by inches. I'll never forget his broken body and bloody face. I can't sleep. I was at a music festival once, and when a popular band came onto the main stage the crowd surged forward. Someone tripped and about 100 people went down in a big pileup. I was on the bottom of the pile, or near enough, and I genuinely thought I was done for. Thankfully I escaped with just a sprained ankle and I don't think anyone else was seriously hurt. But was it scary? I was only about 16 at the time, which didn't help. When I was 13 I watched my friend get hit by a car and die. We were outside of a park and he was running around chasing these other kids and throwing sand at them. This is a park in an urban neighborhood, so pretty much all of our houses, which were pretty much all multi-family houses, are all within the vicinity of the park. This was also in the summer, the day before the 4th of July, so kids were everywhere. The two kids being chased ran into the alley between their house and their neighbor's house. They stood behind their chain-link fence and teased the kid chasing them because they got away. The kid chasing them was walking backward and swearing at them. He was walking backward between the parked cars that were along the curb and moving toward the street. I was across the street and seen a car speeding down the street toward him, and before I could even say anything he had been hit. He flew about 25 feet and was laying in the middle of the street squirming around. I was in shock and looked eye to eye with the passenger in the rear seat on the right side. The car was only about 10 feet away. He shouted to the driver to go and they ran my friend over. He died right there in front of all of us. It's been almost 20 years and I still think about it. I was 19, still lived at home, and worked at my university bookstore. We had to work really late stocking before every semester started. One night I got home around 1:30 in the morning. My parents were asleep, the entire neighborhood was quiet. I lived a couple houses from the corner. I had parked and gotten my bag and had just locked my car when a pickup truck with a bunch of guys in the bed of it drove up the side street. They slammed on the brakes and threw it in reverse. One of them said "get her," and the next thing I knew, at least 4 grown men were running towards me. I had to run around my car, to my front door, unlock it, and get in before they got to me. I managed to get in and just locked the deadbolt when the first guy got a hold of the door handle and tried to yank it open. I had slammed the door hard and woke my parents up. I was screaming my head off and grabbed the shotgun my dad kept in the closet. I managed to get out guys on the front porch and my dad grabbed his pistol and looked out the window. They were already running back to the truck. He went outside and they took off. We called the police but the truck and guys were long gone by the time they got to our house. Nothing else ever came of it. The truck wasn't seen in the neighborhood again. They weren't local to it either. Guess they were opportunists cruising for something to get into. A group of my friends and I explored an abandoned asylum/mental hospital a couple years ago in the OKC metro. Very unsafe at night for silly college freshmen like ourselves. The first experience we had was all of us taking our merry time enjoying the darkness and generally around. You have to come in through a broken window, and we were all gathered at the window just being dumb when we hear loud, echoing footsteps down the hall running towards us. We all did that "who the heck isn't here? Who's messing with us?" look and turn and, after realizing we're all present and none of us are sprinting down a dark abandoned hallways, booted out of there. The second time, we could hear a group of people messing with us, jumping from around corners and such, but they never got too close. We assumed it was an animal at first, but got brave, and realized it was a person. We managed to catch them and, after staring at a collection of seemingly drugged up 20-somethings, who begged us for cans of paint and cigarettes, we got the not-so-good vibes, finally, you say? And tried to leave. The leader of the haunted asylum cronies asked if we had jewelry, which we denied. He then said the creepiest thing I've heard in my life. "I like jewelry, I take it off the girls here when they sleep." We bolted. My junior year of college I moved into a house with 4 other guys. We were all on the swim team. There was a party at our house one Friday night. Myself and my girlfriend, however, were not drinking or participating in the party and we were just hanging out upstairs in my room, which was in the attic. We went to bed when things started to quiet down. Around 4:30 to 5 a.m. somebody screaming woke me up. I was so dazed I thought it was just some drunk obnoxious people. My girlfriend starts to budge me to wake up saying she is hearing something. I look up and our alarm is blinking indicating the power went out, and we start hearing the smoke detectors going off. I walk out of my room into the second part of the attic where my roommate is already awake with a flashlight. We both go downstairs together. We walk through a walkway room and open the door to the hallway only to be hit with a huge wall of black smoke. We slam the door closed and run upstairs to grab our girlfriends to let them know there is a fire and we need to get out immediately. So we run downstairs into the walkway room and bust open the window to go out into the second floor balcony. All 4 of us jump down from there and we run to the side of the house. One of our roommates is trapped at the other end of the hallway, too drunk and too out of it from all of the smoke inhalation, so we start throwing rocks at his window to try to help him break the glass. I run to the front door, open it and try to crawl under the smoke because I hear someone lying on the floor moaning. It's too dark and the smoke is way too thick to get through, so I am forced to abandon my friend. I run out into the street and see the fire trucks on their way, so as soon as the first fireman runs out of the truck I immediately tell him where the 2 people are that are still in the house and how to get to them. Also that one of our friends may be sleeping in the basement. He usually does when we have parties. They drag all 3 of the guys remaining in the house and rush them to the hospital. One of the guys was declared dead on the scene, one of them was unconscious for a week, and the other was in the hospital for a week as well, however was conscious and moving around. They still do not know what caused the fire, but my theory was my friend, the one who died, was sleeping in the basement and left the PlayStation 2 running, which set off the electrical circuits causing a fire. Edit. This was my theory and mine alone. No physical proof to the cause. We had a man cave in the basement with a lot of wiring and old electronics hooked up to one power cable. My friend always play PS2 downstairs before going to bed. My thought is he passed out drunk, leaving it on with a game running, causing it to overheat and blowing out the outlet, sending sparks hitting the tent he had set up in the corner. I was 8 years old and had just gotten home from a camping trip with my dad, brother, uncle and grandfather. My mom wasn't home and my dad decided to take my brother and I for ice cream. Shortly after getting our ice cream, my dad had an allergic reaction to an antibiotic. He passed out as he was calling my mom. I took the phone and had to explain to my mom where we were. Paramedics arrived soon after. My mom pulled in right after the paramedics got there. As we followed the ambulance, it was the only time I heard my mom curse. Someone cut her off and she flipped him off and then yelled obscenities at him. My aunt met us at the hospital and took us to the park to play while my dad got treated. She took us back to her house for the night. My dad was fine and learned he was allergic to penicillin. It was really scary as a little kid. It's 3 p.m. and I text my roommate about something pedantic. She doesn't answer. Throughout my work shift, until 10:30, I am repeatedly checking my phone to no avail. Something you should understand about my roommate, this girl texts back. In minutes, if not an hour, I know something is wrong. I get home to a dark apartment. Maybe she's at school working on a project? It's almost time for finals. She could have gone out with friends. Her phone could have died. I take a few breaths and shower. At 1 a.m., she hasn't said anything and is nowhere to be found. I start to get really worried, now, because this is so unbelievably not like her. My first thought is to go into her room to check if her laptop is gone, probably the best indicator that she went to her mom's house, a friend's house, or school. The laptop is sitting on her desk, along with a spilled bottle of rum and 2 empty pill bottles. I rush into her bathroom. There's vomit in her toilet. Everything else in the apartment is eerily normal. No notes, no misplaced items, no destruction. No sign of struggle. Calling the police for the first time is a surreal thing. I had to have been dissociating when I showed them my only tangible picture of her, a framed photo of us in cosplay. Not necessarily helpful. It starts to rain. I wonder if her body is in a ditch, soaked in filthy runoff. That night, I sleep on the couch, unevenly and poorly. The next day at 1 p.m., it's the 24-hour mark since I last heard from her. It's then that I realize I have to call her abusive mother to ask for help. The phone company tells us that she called 911 at 4:30 the previous day. Her GPS shows that she's at the local emergency room. She doesn't remember me rushing to her hospital bedside, and she doesn't remember me crying and apologizing. She does remember them forcing her to drink charcoal. Over the next 3 weeks, she was held twice in 2 different mental hospitals. She came home for a day, but I had to drive her to the ER when I walked in on her trying to strangle herself. Got approached by a gangbanger, maybe 12 or 13? My way home from work with my fiancé, now ex-husband, one Sunday. I didn't realize something was wrong until I felt my fiancé start turning my engagement ring so the diamond was in my palm and told me to stay quiet no matter what happened. The kid pulled a gun from his waistband and offered it to us for $200. My fiancé said we didn't have any money. So the kid looked at me, waved the gun in my fiancé's face and said, "What if we gank you for her?" He stared him down and said, very calmly, "I'm on my way home from mass with my wife." And the while, he's squeezing my hand as hard as he can and tucking me into his side. I don't know to this day why that worked, but the kid lowered the gun, looked at the gold band on my finger and said, "Yeah, okay. But don't tell nobody you saw me." Then he ran off. My mother and I were held hostage at knife point in a third world very poor country in our hotel room. The only reason we were able to get away was that the men were so tweaked out we talked them down and distracted them for 2 hours until someone in another hotel room called the police. I was not expecting to get out of that room unhurt, but we did. I was hanging out with my dad and brother. My dad and I decided to go get pizza, leaving my brother to watch my kids, 2 and 3 years old. Got back from picking up the pizza and noticed the front door was cracked. I immediately asked my dad why is the front door open, as he was a few steps ahead of me and hadn't noticed when he walked in. He hears me, looks around the living room, yells to my brother, "Where are the kids?" My brother, who was on the computer with his back facing the door and headphones on, jerked around and starts panicking. We all run out the door screaming my kids' names, running around looking for them. I call 911 and I'm hysterically trying to explain to the operator that my toddlers are gone. It's nighttime, so it's dark, we are near a major street, and all that's running through my mind is that they've been hit by a car, or picked up by some freak. I decided right then that if they were dead that was it for me. I wouldn't be able to continue living. My brother came around the corner with both of them in his arms. A neighbor had found them. It all lasted maybe 2 minutes, longest 2 minutes of my life, and that feeling of dread was the worst feeling ever, like my stomach, lungs, and heart had been ripped from my body. I was sobbing, I couldn't breathe, and even though I'm not a violent person, I was about to beat the shit out of my brother, but he got inside and fell to his knees and started sobbing. I could tell he felt like shit, so I couldn't hit him. The only person to eat any pizza was my youngest, the rest of us were sick to our stomachs. I went out the next morning and bought a metal lock plate and installed it up high on the door, and I never leave the house now without hearing that lock behind me. I was a geology major and we spent a few weeks mapping in the mountains. There was around 25 of us in the class. The rule was that we had to be back at the vehicles at 4 p.m. so we weren't still out there when it got dark. We were all running late one day, not the class's fault. The professors decided we had to fit in a few extra unit stops, and the fastest way down the mountain was this really steep drainage with loose rock. We never would have gone that way had it not been so late. Some people were really good hikers and were already almost to the base of the steep part. I had 5 blisters between both of my feet. I was dumb and didn't break my boots in well enough, so I was still pretty close to the top. All of a sudden a guy behind me accidentally stepped on a loose boulder that was probably 2 feet in diameter and it started tumbling down the drainage. We all started yelling and we watched the boulder fall in the path of one of our classmates. You could see him watching it, trying to determine which direction to jump since the boulder was acting like a football and was bouncing in every direction. At the last second, he ducked down and dodged to the left and it missed his head by a few inches. Everyone continued to yell as it made its way down the mountain toward the rest of the class. I've never seen a group of people scatter so fast, never mind the fact that they had a bunch of rocks and cacti to climb over. It luckily never hit anyone. I still can't get over how fast that thing was moving and how incredibly loud it was as it crashed its way down probably 300 yards. So my stepmother had to go out of the country for a few months. Her father had a heart attack. So since my husband at the time worked out of town 3 weeks out of the month, my son and I moved in with my dad to help take care of my 3 little sisters. At the time, there was my son and youngest sister, 18 months, my middle sister, 7, and my oldest sister, 13. So Olivia, middle sister, had told me that morning that she was going over to her friend Diamond's house after school. We lived in a suburban housing development miles from anything, the elementary and junior/SR. High were in the middle of the development, so no big deal, no worries. All the kids walked home from school. Well, about 5:30, I get a call from Diamond's mom, asking if I can send Diamond home. My heart drops. I tell her that Liv had said she was going with Diamond to her house after school. School got out at 3:30, so this means that both the 7-year-old girls had been MIA for about 2 hours. I left the toddlers with my oldest little sister, and started going door to door. Half an hour later, I run into Diamond's mom, who's doing the same thing. It's 6 o'clock. 2.5 hours. I call the cops, and report her missing. I call my dad, and he heads home. You have to understand, up until that point, all I could think was, this was a safe neighborhood. Nothing bad had ever happened there. Kids walked everywhere, even after dark. People didn't lock their doors, and kids roamed around with little to no supervision. I couldn't believe something had actually happened. The police show up. I list off all of Liv's friends I can think of. Diamond's mom adds a few to the list. I have to explain that she's my little sister. My dad is on his way, but he worked an hour away, and was stuck in rush hour traffic. The police officers, one car had shown up, with 2 officers, issue an Amber Alert, as it's dark now, and they're playing it safe. Within 15 minutes, there's a dozen police cars roaming the neighborhood. My dad shows up. I'm freaking hysterical at this point. 45 minutes later, the police officer waiting at the house gets a call on his radio. They found the girls. They decided to walk the 7 miles from the school to the Burger King, and were playing in the play area. They brought the girls back. Both Diamond's mom and I were simultaneously hugging and spanking the 2 of them, yelling and crying. I've been through a lot of crap in my 30 years. Those 4 hours were easily some of the worst I've ever experienced. It was my first mom moment where I realized that all the shit I'd been through meant nothing compared to the thought that something had happened to my little sister. It still affects me today, and how I handle my, now, 2 children. When I was 11, I was scheduled to have major invasive surgery on my heart. I had to sign what I now call the death waiver, or the document stating that if I died during surgery, The doctors and her hospital wasn't legally liable. I was taken to the prep area, got into my gown, was wheeled into the surgical theater. The doctors prepped me for me going under. I slowly relaxed and blacked out from the anesthesia. I remember waking up with an extremely bright light above me, and being very cold. My first thought was, this recovery room is really cold. Why'd they put the light directly above me? I'd been in a recovery room before, so I reached for what I thought was the call button. It's on a remote attached to the bed WA cord. I reached for and inserted right into my arm and tried pulling on it, hard. I hear a voice say, "Why is he waking up already? We're not done yet." Shit, he's trying to take his 4 out. A nurse pinned my hand back down, and the doctor ordered more anesthesia. I fell back under and woke up again, this time in my recovery room. When I was 16, was living with my mother and my mother's partner at the time. Well, turns out my mom was a hoe and texting/seeing another guy behind this bloke's back. The bloke worked as a construction worker, so would wake early to get the transport to work. One morning he decides to read her phone, and that was it. He found out. He proceeds to storm out the door at 5 a.m. pointedly slamming it. I was still awake because I was heavy addicted to WoW at the time. 10 minutes later this guy comes back and runs up the stairs to the room where my mother was sleeping. They start arguing with my mother, only just waking up with someone shouting at her. They argue for 5 minutes, whatever, none of my business. She made her bed, now she must lay in it, literally and figuratively, then it falls silent, not normal for my mother. I open my door and go into the room. Here is this 50-year-old bloke pinning my mother down with a pillow over her face, attempting to smother her. I had no idea what to do. I'm 16, just in the middle of my final exams at school. So I grab a Guitar Hero guitar, and I just hit the guy over and over till he turned and smacked me one, right in the face. A 50-year-old full-on punching a 16-year-old in the face. But that didn't matter. The most important part was I wasn't going to see my mother get murdered. And anyway, that's the scariest situation I've ever been in. It's also the story of how Guitar Hero saved my mother's life. A woman in our salon passed out during a pedicure. Like sitting straight up in her chair, unresponsive. When we tried to get her to come around, her tongue, which kind of sat halfway out her mouth, did a roll like she was swallowing, then she started to twitch. I immediately said, "I think she's having a seizure." So they did what they could to get her to wake up. She was white as a sheet. It was the first I've seen something like that, so it made me sick on the stomach. Ambulance arrived, but she was conscious by then and was pretty dazed and sweaty, but all right from what we can tell. Her husband arrived soon after and they went to the hospital. A week later she sends flowers to the shop apologizing for the incident. She turned out okay and still continues her regular routine. Wrote this in another post, but my parents had a lot of issues. My father was abusive and it all boiled over when I was 10. I have PTSD mainly because of this situation, so there's parts I don't remember and other parts I recall vividly. The gist of it is that I was sick. My mother left him to watch me in the kitchen while she put my sister to bed. I threw up while he continued to load the dishwasher, and when she came in and saw what was happening, she calmly explained that when your kid throws up, you actually have to help them. He lost his shit, starts throwing plates. I ran upstairs, getting glass in my feet in the process. Fighting commences. My brother must have woken up at that point, or he never went to bed, I don't remember, because he runs upstairs and we hide in the space between the couch and the wall. My mother shouts that if my father kills her, we have to call the police, and it's at that point that I remember he owns a gun. Deciding FCK it, I grabbed the phone and dialed the emergency number. No go. All I hear is the dialed tone. I'm sobbing hysterically and unable to communicate to my brother that the phone doesn't work, but he must realize, because he shouts over the stair railing that the phone isn't working. Our father helpfully explains, "I cut the phone lines. We don't need the cops here." Okay, up till that point, I thought that was only a thing that could be accomplished in movies. My memory fades there, and picks up with my brother and I out on the balcony, deciding whether or not to jump and run to a neighbor. Doing so would mean injuring ourselves. Memory fades again. Somehow we got into the car. My mother is driving us to the police station and I'm in the back trying not to throw up again because we didn't have time to grab the sick bucket. Hell, we didn't even have time to grab my sister, and my mom tells us calmly that can we please pray that God keeps my sister safe. She doesn't want to scare us, but I know she's always believed children's prayers are more powerful. I pray that my father doesn't kill my sister. We go to the police station and I get shards of glass pulled out of my feet while my mother talks to the policeman. The policeman is in his late 20s. I remember hoping he'd ask me if I was okay, if he'd ask if my dad had done this before, so I could tell him yes and then I'd never have to see my dad again. He doesn't though. He was sexist and thinks my mother is exaggerating and being dramatic to try and get my father into trouble. He drives to our house and my mom parks in a dark area. I watch the policeman lead my father out of the house. He looks apologetic as he tells my father that he has to leave for 24 hours, and asks if he can drive him to a hotel or anywhere. Don't mind the 2 kids that this man had just traumatized. My father left for the night. The next morning, literally like 6 hours later, he was supposed to be away for 24 hours. He breaks in. I'm the only one home. I don't remember where my family went, but I think it was to pick up a suitcase from a family friend. I was still sick and couldn't bear to move, and I hide in the closet until he leaves. We left everything behind and flew across the country. We were homeless for 6 months, but we got away. Also, oh shit, this got long. I don't really know how to make anything short, so I figure most people won't read up until this point. If you do, I'm sorry. Probably tamed by other people's accounts, but scared the hell out of me. I was sitting working on something with my daughter. I had my leg tucked up under me, like sitting basically on my ankle. Wasn't paying attention. My foot went dead but I didn't notice it. Beyond pins and needles, but I didn't know. My son had an accident upstairs, so I literally jumped up out of the chair to run to get him, and my dead meat of a foot hit the ground and I couldn't feel it. I turned it badly and I thought honestly, that it was really dead for a moment. I had never lost all feeling like that, and I was horrified both of what was happening to me and what might be going on with my son. So I basically just pushed through my stupid foot and pulled myself up, hopped up the stairs banging and dragging my foot to find he'd slipped in the bathroom and was more scared than anything, thankfully. Anyways, perfect storm equals moment of recent terror. When I was about 8 years old, I was walking through a knee-high river to the other side. I underestimated how strong the current was, and it swept me off my feet. At first, I thought it was kind of fun being dragged by the water. Seconds later, I realized the rocks are tearing my legs and arms to shreds, and I eventually got swept underwater, way above my head. Because of the current, it disoriented me, and I legitimately couldn't tell which way was up. Some stranger jumped in to save me. I would have died for sure, if he hadn't come. I'm 20 years old now, and haven't been in water since. Can't go anywhere near water without having a panic attack, unless it's a shower or drinking, of course. During summer breaks from college, I was a camp counselor. We were on a canoe trip on a day that was about 50 to 50 for storms. These canoe trips were usually half a day long, 2 hours to a place where we stopped for lunch and to just hang out on the riverbank, and another hour down the river to another island to stop at and explore. Thankfully, we'd made it to the second stop before the skies started showing telltale signs of incoming storms. I made the call to get everyone back in canoes and headed toward our takeout point quickly. It started raining on that final leg, and then out of nowhere, it just seemed like the sky got pitch black. Never seen a sky turn faster, so as we approach the takeout point, I'm paddling like hell to take lead so I can get kids and canoes up the embankment. I radioed ahead to the camp to get some golf carts down the shuttle kids quickly. Before I knew it, we've got lightning crashing down around us as we've still got half our kids in canoes on open water. I'm frantically pushing kids up a muddy hill, swimming out to drag and pull canoes in, fighting mud to get canoes up this hill and out of the way, all while the storm is going ballistic all around us. Kids are terrified. I'm just trying to get the kids out of the water and not thinking of anything else. The next issue is that our takeout point is still a mile from any four-wall shelter, and even with a multi-seat golf cart, we only have so much space in the cart. I put most of the younger and more scared kids on the cart and sent them ahead to a cabin, and took the remaining 10 or so teenagers with me and another counselor to what was effectively just a picnic pavilion nearby, one wall and a roof. I was 100% sure a tornado was going to touch down and we would be almost totally exposed. Tried to get them to get their backs against the lone wall and cover their heads, then find a tarp, not that it could do much, but better than nothing, to cover us. But the whole time I was just thinking I am totally at the mercy of Mother Nature and I have no control over what happens next. Run into that a few times in my life, including a neighbor's house being struck by lightning and burning down with threat to catch my house on fire too. Being totally at the mercy of nature is terrifying. Due to a list of personal health problems, I was on some pretty strong codeine and other pills. Anyway, I was drinking and stupid young me went, oh shit, I haven't taken my night pills, so there I go popping down my codeine and some Valium. But the party is still going and the weed I had earlier is starting to make me sleepy along with the Valium, so I take a Notice tablet to keep me awake along with a can of energy drink. Mind you, I'm also on cold and flu meds at this time. I went maybe 2 hours before I hit the deck and couldn't feel anything. I was conscious but I couldn't move at all, only scream for help. My friends and family put me on the bed not realizing how many meds were tearing through my system and just told me to sleep it off. I honestly thought if I closed my eyes I would never open them again. I haven't made that mistake again. I attended Humboldt State University in Northern California. On the weekends, I would drive out to Ruth Lake near Trinity County and fish the lake for rainbow trout. I met this guy named Dave at the lake near the dam. I don't think Dave was his real name, and I'm pretty sure he was a serial killer. We started talking about politics and he seemed to be an intelligent dude. Then out of nowhere he became really strange. He started talking about the lack of cell phone coverage in the area and how the far northeastern part of the state, California, embodies the true spirit of the Wild West. Almost no law enforcement, except for the occasional highway patrol officer or fish and wildlife warden. I verbatim remember him saying, "I can do absolutely anything out here, anything." He mentioned how he isn't concerned about law enforcement at all. When I asked what he was talking about, that's when he admitted he killed 4 people and it wasn't in self-defense. I thought he was a creepy 50-year-old guy who told stories to keep tourists away, but that all changed when he said the 4th person he killed severed his finger and he held up his left hand missing his index finger. I literally just tossed my stuff into my car and left. When I was in middle school, I missed the bus, so I decided to do the 10-mile walk home. I live in a very rural area where a canyon separates the school from my house. I decided to freestyle climb down the canyon because I thought it would be quicker. The canyon is about 850 feet deep and I ended up getting stuck on a steep slick slope that was about 100 feet off the ground. I thought I was stuck there and a goner. So I etched a note to my family in the sandstone cliff of the canyon. I put the date and was saying how much I love them and I died trying to be Bear Grylls. I ended up jumping into a bush that was like 10 feet away with small scrapes and bruises, and I was able to squirm to the safety of the bottom of the canyon. That note is still there to this day and I'll never forget that. My sister spotted her stalker outside my house, so my mother loaded me and my 5 siblings into the van to go to the police. Except we didn't go to the police, we drove around the oval behind my house looking for the guy to run him down. I asked her to let us out of the van because this was crazy and if she's going to be murdering someone she at least shouldn't do it with 6 of her children, 5 of them minors, in the back of the car. Her response was, "Sometimes when you're upset you do irrational things." I'm upset. We're going to run him down. We never found him and she eventually calmed down enough that she drove home again, but WTF. I'm not a huge roller coaster fan. Usually it takes a chest protector for me to get excited enough to ride. There's a famous roller coaster at Six Flags in NJ called El Toro. It's a wooden roller coaster and I believe it has some kind of record. Maybe the fastest, maybe the highest, but, about 25 seconds into it, I swear to Christ my lap bar came almost totally unhinged. This was so much more than just hang time. You know how it clicks a few times until it's down far enough and locks? So mine didn't completely unclick, but probably was one click away from completely unlocking. I spent the rest of the ride locked into one position of pressing my feet against the car and holding onto the little handbar in front of me because I felt like my life truly depended on it. I came off the seat completely, swear to God it wasn't just hang time, scared the ever-living shit out of me. I was ready to go home after that. I had a good cry when I got back on the ground. Haven't been back since, so it's been about 10 years. When I was about 12 years old, I was with my sister and father. It was Christmas Eve. My father's family is in northern Illinois. We went to my aunt's house that day. The weather was okay. Lighting snowing but nothing too bad. We were on a major highway with 6 lanes. We were pretty much all the way on the left side. The traffic wasn't too bad either. A car that was ahead of us stopped abruptly, which caused, I remember right, a 15-car pile-up. One moment we were on the left side and the next the car was spinning out of control and rolled several times. Amazingly we didn't have major injuries. I had a concussion / major whiplash / broke a rib and fractured my hand. It took them a while to get us out of the car. It was terrifying, and when I was about 14 we had a fire. I was home alone. My mom was out with my sister. My mom hates the smell of vanilla, so I'd light a vanilla candle when she wasn't there. I'd lit candles before. I stupidly left the room for 2 minutes tops. I come back to find a curtain on fire. I'd sworn I put it somewhere else away from curtains. I froze. I'm not even sure how long I took before calling 911. I remember being outside in the snow. And next thing I know I'm in kitchen I've never seen before. It turned out to be a neighbor across the street. I lost a lot of time that day. Not remembering a ton. When I was 16 I had my 4th open heart surgery. We were at Ronald McDonald House in Chicago, just a few blocks away from Children's Memorial Hospital. We had an early check-in since I was the first case. My mom wanted to call the shuttle bus that takes you to and from the hospital and Ronald McDonald House. It was still dark and it was raining. But I wanted to walk to the hospital. I felt like I was walking to my death. This open heart surgery was risky. So I wanted to be outside one last time. Those 15 minutes or so walking to the hospital. What I was thinking about some terrifying stuff. That walk changed me. I had checked into hospital with an abscess, very painful, that needed to go. I was 15 at the time, and I was put in a ward with a baby, a little boy, and a girl who looked about 17. I later learned she was 14. At about 8 at night, she went into the toilet. She didn't come out or make any noise. The nurses started to get concerned as my mom pulled the curtain around me. She didn't realize there were 2 curtains and she had just given me an unencumbered view into the toilet. There she was, choking on the ground after trying to hang herself. The image of her on the ground, scars around her neck, at 14 years old, will never leave my brain. My roommate decided he was in love with me. This led to a lot of awkward and uncomfortable things. I asked him to move out, gave him a month or something. A few days later he downed a bottle of vodka. He attacked me. He attacked me on my bed, then decided to go brush his teeth. He caught me trying to call 911, pulled the phone out of the wall and destroyed it. 1999. I tried to escape and he choked me till I blacked out. I thought I was dying. I still have the scar where I hit my chin on the wall. I eventually did escape and ran to a convenience store in my pajamas and called the police. I still have flashbacks. He ended up in psych unit. My family helped me move all his stuff to his sister's house. A few years later he died of pancreatic cancer. When I was 10 years old I lived in Mexico at the time. I was outside running around with my friends from the block. Soon enough like 4 pickup trucks pull up to a house like 3 houses down from mine. Before you know it there's like about 10 men in ski masks with AK-47s and shotguns surrounding this house. That house was known where narcos/cartel members lived. Me and my friends are just sitting there watching this because we know something bad was about to happen. One of the men goes and knocks on the door and someone opens the door. The next thing that happened haunted me as a child. The man who knocked at the door shoots the man who opened the door like 15 times and then all these men start lighting up the house with everything they got. I was froze. I couldn't move. I'd cried but I couldn't. I sat there in the street as a gunfight unraveled. Just saw a person get killed for the first time and I didn't know what to do. I finally snap out of it and hide behind this trash bin. Bullets were flying everywhere at this point. Grenades were being thrown. I'm not sure by who but the loudness of it was deafening. I was sitting behind this dumpster while bullets are going everywhere. I sat there and waited for what seemed like an eternity, 4 hours. It eventually was over and I ran home. Everyone was so worried and mad at me but glad I was okay. The image of that man being shot and seeing his dead body drop to the ground really bothers me. But this wasn't the last time I saw something like this. I had an interesting childhood. When we first moved to North Carolina, my brother and I would explore 4 acres of woods every chance we got. We moved from Illinois so we were far from used to seeing wild lizards and the crazy insects of NC. Anyways, we were exploring a rather overgrown section of the woods, seeing what sorts of secrets the property held, and despite our parents' warnings, hoping we'd see some snakes or something. We get to a patch of brush about 3 or 4 feet high when we see a black blur drop from a tree about 50 yards away, and hear this huge crackling thud in the undergrowth. The thing then proceeds to scream at us. I say scream because there's really no better way to describe it. It kinda sounded like the giant lizard from Star Wars Episode 3, and charges through the brush. All we see are ferns and weeds moving out of the way for this thing. We're gonna die. The thing's bigger than any dog we've ever seen, and our grandfather had a Great Pyrenees. Google it if you don't know what it is. We run for our lives, and at some point the thing runs into the creek that runs adjacent to our property. We went back out after it, again, despite our parents forbidding us, this time with a machete. We have one for clearing vines, a golf club, 2 kitchen knives and a video camera, but couldn't find anything. Just trampled plants. To this day we have no idea what it was. One of my friends I had just met in college was having a huge night party at her house. She lived in a pretty sketchy part of town but had a huge 5-bedroom house she shared with 5 female roommates. The house was a duplex and the other side was shared among 5 male roommates. Everyone is super drunk and having a great time. We decide to go outside on the porch to hang out for a bit and then pop into the guys' party beside us. 6 of us are all sitting on the porch while a couple of our friends smoke. All of a sudden we hear a huge commotion and a blood-curdling scream. The house was set back pretty far and the porch was surrounded by high bushes so we couldn't really see what was going on from where we were sitting. We started walking towards the road and we see some guy laying in the middle of the road and 6 to 7 guys surrounding him just kicking the shit out of him. One of my close guy friends starts screaming at these guys, stupid, but he was visiting from a small hick town and didn't realize how dangerous this was. One of the guys pulls a gun on my friend and tells us to mind our own business while the other guys run off. At this point we are still a good 15 to 20 feet away and I am freaking out. The guy with the gun takes off running and my friends and I are just in shock. One of my friends calls 911 and we decide that we need to go check on this guy. He is absolutely demolished. He is bleeding from his head, his nose and his mouth. He has pissed and shit himself and is completely incoherent. We stayed with him trying to keep him awake until the ambulance came. Eventually the ambulance arrives and EMS takes over. This happened 4 years ago and my friends from the small hick town still refuse to come visit the city. We were scared shitless for a few weeks wondering if these guys realized where my friend lived and if they would come back. The police advised us it was gang/drug related and didn't seem very concerned for the guy's welfare. We never got an update on the guy who was beaten, but I truly hope he was okay and survived his injuries. Don't read if you are sensitive about abuse and emotional story. I was in 2nd grade, about 7. My mom had shared custody with my biological father, so he got me on the weekends along with my brother. My brother would frequently go with his friends somewhere. I would be left alone with my biological father. I was on the couch when all of a sudden my biological father bursts out of the room and throws me to the floor. I started to cry and said, "Diaresis, what are you doing?" Diaresis. He then proceeded to beat me up and mostly damage my leg, where I would later discover that it had a giant bruise from my waist to just below my foot. He told me, "Diaresis, if you tell anyone I will find you and hurt you." Diaresis. I was abused for 2 years before I decided enough was enough and then told my mother. Nothing happened to him, but I now have a restraining order against him and my mother has full custody of me. But to this day I don't trust anyone as much as I used to. I was at a 4th of July event many years ago and a huge crowd started forming by a bridge over a river. A woman had thrown her 14-month-old kid at the bridge at the water and he died. Happened last week actually. I've been suffering with an issue of pain on the left side of my chest along with radial arm pain. Was sitting on my couch when my chest felt like an elephant was sitting on it. Nothing I could do could get me to catch my breath. My wife called the ambulance. They were at her house in 4 minutes or so. All I really remember was being scared I was dying and not able to breath. Few hours later and plenty of tests, they couldn't figure out what happened. Finally started coming through around then. They sent me home and 2 weeks later still don't have an answer, still in a pain on my side and arm. Lost on a solo hike in Yellowstone with no note. Ended up face to face with a large bison in land where people probably haven't traversed in decades and was ultimately 12 miles off course and had to hitchhike back to my car at the trailhead. Bro-in-law takes his wife and kid to a cookout with his boss at the time and the other workers/the boss's family. Boss and bro-in-law start drinking and my sis-in-law gets nervous cause they have their 1-year-old at this family-friendly work party. Calls me and my hubby. We show up to bro-in-law and boss arguing. Other sis-in-law, we will call her A to avoid confusion, shows up with her boyfriend. Bro-in-law tells us all we are leaving before anything escalates. We start to leave. Boss swings at bro-in-law but doesn't connect. Arguments ensue and my hubby pins boss against a car and tells him it's in his best interest to chill out. Boss calms down, we think, and hubby lets him loose while we all continue to go to our cars to leave. Boss swings at L and connects, which sends L flying back into a parked car then to the ground. Full-on chaos ensues. We all make a break for it. As the last of our 3 cars pulls out of the driveway, Boss grabs a T-post and swings at his wife. She screams and runs and jumps into the truck with my hubby and bro-in-law. We all drive off. On the road, Boss follows us in a van, almost side-swiping my car where the baby is at. Tries to run my hubby off the road to get to his wife. We eventually make it to the wife's father's house where we literally dump her out and disappear into the night. I still have nightmares about that crazy man. Aftermath of a school shooting. A cop searching cars for drugs and alcohol in the school parking lot got the kid before he got in the school. It was the night of prom, and as he's walking to the front doors, the first set he went to were locked. People start leaving. Kid opens fire, hits one kid in the leg, and then is gunned down by the police officer. After turning to and aiming at the officer, I hear a rumor that somebody was shot. Of course, we're in a small town and I say no way. I grab my one friend and go to look out the front door into our school lobby from the gym. See the cop car lights lighting up outside like it's day, pull an immediate 180 degrees and walk back in. DJ pulls us aside and says we should tell people to not leave. Shortly after doing what he asks, I call my parents and tell them what's going on. They obviously start to panic and tell family/other parents what happened. I was the first person to call someone and say what happened. Soon, cops with rifles walk in and search for any more shooters, and start taking our names and addresses. My buddy is keeping me posted on Facebook. His dad has police radio, and tells me they have reason to believe it was a friend of ours. Really was one of the scariest and saddest days of my life. A month after Sandy Hook, I was student teaching in a first-grade classroom, although I was still in the observation phase. Lead teacher was reading a story to the children on the rug when someone bangs on the door. We were next to the autism classroom, so I thought maybe someone was having a bad day. 3 minutes later, we hear the banging again. This time we, the lead teacher and I, look up and see someone with a ski mask doing the knocking. We quickly get all the kids into the shared bathroom and try to keep everyone quiet. Lead teacher calls 911. Kids are crying and we try to calm them, but we're scared too. We hear bumping and moving in our classroom, so I am mentally preparing to die. Turns out, it was our janitor straightening our room. Come to find out, all of this was a poorly planned active shooter drill. The administration didn't let anyone know, including 911 dispatch. There was a SWAT team on the way to the school. Kids refused to come to school the next day and I don't blame them. I don't know, because I was just a student teacher, but I hope someone got sued. Thinking about this question, I keep coming back to a moment in my youth when I was holding a knife. I was still in the process of learning how to conquer my depression and get a handle on some of the OCD behaviors I developed, so was pretty sensitive emotionally and mentally. I was at a Boy Scout meeting, and we'd been doing something with knives like carving or whatever. While I was holding the knife, a thought popped into my head that I couldn't shake. What would it feel like to cut yourself? I couldn't tear myself away from the image in my head, or stop imagining how the steel would feel against my skin, or the copper smell of blood, or how it made my heart pound inside my chest. Why was my heart pounding? The world felt like it had fallen away and it was just me and the knife. Do it, do it. The voice inside my head was so strong, so compelling. I'd self-harmed before, and it'd just be so easy to do this one thing. I wanted to give in to the voice so badly. I managed to put the knife down and then quickly left the room so nobody would see my hands shaking uncontrollably. It horrified me how thin the barrier is between me and going back to hurting myself. This doesn't compare really to what other people have been through. I was watching fireworks with my family at my cousin's boathouse on the Connecticut River. My family was about to get on the boat, so my dad and I were putting on mosquito repellent at the beginning of the dock. While my uncle got the boat all ready, my 5-year-old sister walked down the dock past us, and neither of us thought anything of it since our cousin was just right there at the end of the dock. But not even 5 seconds later I hear him yelling, and see her slip in between the boat and the dock somehow. The boat ended up crushing her head against the dock, and knocking her unconscious. I don't think I will ever forget the feeling of hopelessness, just seeing her there 1 second, and gone the next. She was dragged under by currents that were stronger than they had been in years, and got caught on a log/branch underwater and drowned. She was found about 6 to 7 days later if I remember correctly. I've had many people tell me that it was my fault, or my family's for not having someone next to her that whole time, But the facts that she was wearing a life vest, and we'd been there done that so many times, and that on top of the fact that my uncle was right there not even 10 feet away, took any worry out of my head. I always really thought that kind of stuff only happened to other people, but that made me realize how easily accidents can happen to anyone, and I'm still constantly scared that others close to me may die in tragic accidents, in what are probably really ridiculous situations to be scared in. I've since been diagnosed with PTSD, and various other panic disorders, and still have night terrors nearly every night about it. Not sure if this compares to other stories here, but what the hell. One day when I was about 14 to 15 I was home alone and sitting in the living room. In my infinite mid-teen wisdom I decided, hey, I'll jack off in the living room. So I grabbed my single dirty picture and did the deed, cleaned up after myself, and got away with none the wiser. Flash forward an hour and my parents come home and we're all sitting in the living room watching TV. My mom was sitting where I had done the deed and I was sitting in a chair just across from her. A few minutes of this goes by, and then my mom looks to the coffee table to her right and picks up a folded up piece of paper. I wasn't until after she started unfolding it that I noticed what it was. Like a dipshit I had forgotten to put away my dirty picture and had left it, folded up, on that coffee table. My heart pretty much stopped right there and all color had disappeared from my face. She was one fold away from seeing it before I snatched it out of her hands without saying a word. It felt like my body was on autopilot. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.